This is Urooj Khan, your instructor of Python, and today we will discuss and we will study about the elements of Python. This is a lecture 2 of unit 1, and in that lecture we will study about the various elements of Python that encapsulated to form a language which is called Python programming, and that elements are very useful and important when you write code and when you build logic and when you will do programming in Python. So in today's lecture, that is the summary of the today lecture. Here we discuss about the elements of Python. First element of Python is Python variables. Second, literals. Third, Python keywords. Fourth, Python identifiers. Fifth, string. Sixth, list. Seventh, tuple. So these are the elements of the Python that we will study in this lecture and will deep dive in that all variables, literals, keywords, identifiers, string, list, tuple. So that before moving to the deep dive in the elements of Python, firstly we will discuss why we need elements. Before building any home or before building any structure, we will need a proper and symmetric direction, symmetric base to build a particular home, to build a particular program, to build a particular thing. If you are building a home, then you need bricks to form a home, to form a building. Here, if you are writing a code in Python, you need elements to complete the code. So some of the basic elements of Python that a Python program consists are Python variables, literals, Python keywords, Python identifiers, string, list, tuple. So in according to that, and by that, the elements of the Python, our program can be built very successfully and run can be successfully. First element of Python is Python variables. Students, before going to deep dive in Python and before going to write in any program, you have to understand what is variables. Basically, when you are writing something and when you are calculating the profit and when you are calculating any parameter, you need a value, right? You need a value to identify what is going on. Here in programming language, variables is a storage location. Variable is a building block to store the data or value in the program, right? So what is Python variable? Python variable is a location name used to store data in the memory. It is like a building block of our program to store our data or value. It is helpful to think of variables as a container that holds data which can change later throughout programming. Example, number is equal to 10. Let's go to our Python interpreter. In that lecture, we are using Python interpreter, which is basically a Google Colab. So now come to the Google Colab and we will discuss like how we initialize variable and what are the variables and how variables can change with respect to the programming, with respect to the program throughout our programming in a particular code. So let's say we are declaring a variable named number. Student's number is equal to 10. So that is a Python variable. What is this? It is a Python variable. Okay, so this is our Python variable. In that Python variable, we initialize a value 10, right? What we are doing here, this is our Python variable. This is our element of Python, which is a Python variable, and we are initializing that variable to the particular value that is 10. And now what we will do, we will print that particular variable. How we print? We use print function in order to print the particular value of Python, right? So now that the Python variable, it is going to run, right? So that is what the Python variable means. Python variable is basically a container to store our value or data. Print number means here we are using print function in order to print the value, in order to print the data which is stored in the particular variable which is number, right? See, here we are getting 10. 10 is what basically a data value in the variable, right? So here we went and we already saw how to run a particular program using a Python variable. Now come to this to the topic, right? So In that particular thing, we saw Python variables, right? What we saw Python variables, right? We can change Python variables throughout our program. Let's again go to our interpreter. And see. Okay, so like go again and again we are writing code, but here we are taking 5, right? Number is equal to 5, and what we are doing, we are doing print number. So what that particular code of line will give us, that is giving us 5. Why 5? Because we changed the variables. We changed the value of a program in a particular specific data location or variable. Firstly, our value in a variable is 10, and secondly we changed our variable value by initializing it 5. So we can change our value of a variable throughout our program. That is what the meaning here it is, that we can change the value of a Python variable throughout our program, right? I hope you understood very well, students. I already told you Python is super easy and super beneficial either. Here we have created a variable named number. We already saw in the Google Colab that firstly we initialize 10, secondly we initialize 5. So we can change our variables, the value of a variable throughout our program, right? Now go to the second element of Python, which is basically a literal. Okay, so literal is a raw data given in a variable or a constant. Literal can be students a variable, or literal can be a constant, right? So what is literal? Literal can be a constant or a variable. For example, when you in mathematics you initialize the value of pi is equal to 3.14, right? When you do mathematics or in a particular mathematic question, you initialize the value pi is equal to 3.14. So that is what it remains. It remains same in everything, right? So literals, what are literals, students? Literals can be a constant, or variable. Okay, and in our program literals remain fixed, like the value of literals remain fixed throughout our program. Like we can't change the value of literal, it remains fixed in every specific area. The value of literals remain constant, we can say constant. You said pi is equal to 3.14 example, so that is the example. It remains same, throughout our program. Whenever we use pi, whenever we use the variable pi, literal pi, then it remains fixed, remains same throughout the program. So that is what literal is. Variables can be vary, but students literal can't be vary. That is the mainly the basic difference between literal and variables, is that literal can be literal is always remains constant, we can't change, but variable can vary. We can change the value of a variable in a program. Very data can be vary in the variable, but literal it remains same throughout the program, and literal can be a variable or constant. I hope you understood very well, right? So that is what the literal is. Here are various examples. You can see a is equal to 0, b1 000, b is equal to 100, that is decimal literal, that is binary. Binary what? Zeros and ones. Binary are the combination of zeros and ones, right? See, and another literal is octal literal, hexadecimal, float what? Precision, right? Numerical literal basically are immutable, means we cannot change numerical literals. As I told you, if we are initializing pi is equal to 3.14, then that pi is equal to 3.14 is unchangeable. The value of pi will not change throughout the program, it will remain same. Literal, there are basically three types of literal: numeric literal, second is float literal, third is integer literal. So that are the types of literals that we found in a programming language, right? Now students go to the next slide, which is a string literal, and the next element of Python, which is basically a string literal, right? So a string literal is a sequence of character surrounded by quotes. We can use both single, double, or triple quotes for a string, and a character literal is single character surrounded by a single or double quotes. For example, what is literal, students? String literal is basically a combination of characters. What is string literals? Go to the Python interpreter and we will see that what is string literal. String literal is basically, now what is string literal? String literal is basically a combination of characters, right? And we can encapsulate string literal by single quotes, double quotes, or triple quotes. For example, we are saying print this is Python. So that is what is a string literal. It is a combination of characters, and here we are printing it. So what is giving us? This is giving us this is Python. What is it? It is basically a string literal. String literal means combination of characters. T is a character, H is a character, I is a character, S is a character, I is a character, S is a character. The string literal is basically a combination of character, and it is encapsulated in double quotes, single quotes, or multiple quotes. All right. That is what students is string literals. Now come to the next elements of Python, which is basically we can say this basically the next elements of we already discussed our Python elements, and now we are coming towards another next element of Python, which is basically a list. Right? What we discussed till now, we discussed Python variables, we discussed string literals, we discussed literals, and now the next element of Python is a list. What is list? Like, list is an ordered sequence of item. It is one of the most used data type in Python and is very flexible. All the items in a list do not need to be of the same type. Means the list is basically a ordered sequence in Python which can be vary in their data types, right? Like the data types. What are the data types? Data types is like integer, float, string, right? And various data types. But in list, what is the concept in list is that the data type can be vary, right? In list, the data type can be vary. We can basically use any data type in the list, right? And the main difference is that the list is basically a mutable, that we can change the values in list, right? Now go to the Python compiler and we will see the syntax of list. The syntax of list is that now go to the line of code and we will see list. List is basically a ordered sequence which is mutable, like we can change it, we can change the value in a list. And list is represented by students bracket curly braces. List is represented by square bracket. I'm sorry, list is represented by square bracket. Always remember, list is immutable and is represented by square bracket. Okay, now see the example of list. We are commenting it. Okay, so list is basically an immutable data type and it is represented by square bracket. For example, if we are saying list data, this is our variable list data and we are initializing it is n, and every that is n is a particular specific data column, and n example is in single quote. Example is of list, is of list. Okay, and now this is, we make a variable list data and we are initializing a list, that is in the list these are the values and example is of list. And here we go, we are running our program of list. Syntax data, it does not give us anything, because basically we didn't print, we didn't use print function. Okay, okay students, here what we did is we initialize or we made a list, but we didn't use print function, that's why it is not printing here. Now we are printing the list that we already made above, print list data. And if now we are going to run it, here we go, it is giving us a list. Okay, an example is of that list. I hope you understood very well. List is basically immutable and it is represented by square brackets, and we also see implementation like how list can be made and print and give us values in that particular list which is encapsulated, right? Now go to our third elements of Python, which is basically a tuple. Tuple is an ordered sequence of items, same as list. Tuple is basically similar as list, but the most basic difference in the list and the tuple is that list is mutable, whereas tuple is immutable. We cannot modify, we can't change the value of tuple. We can change the value of list, but we can't change the value of tuple. That it is what the most basic difference of tuple and list. And that question is asked in various exams in the college in your Viva of Python, that what is the basic difference between list and tuple. So what you will say, you will tell the examiner that list is basically a mutable and tuple is immutable. We can't change the value inside the tuple, right? And we can also say that list is basically contain any data type, right? Now go to the syntax. What is the syntax of tuple? Now let's go to a Python interpreter. Here I am using the students Google Colab. Google Colab is that platform. Here you don't need to install anything, you don't need to install pandas, numpy, scipy and pip. That is already encapsulated. This is a platform which is made by Google and it is very worthwhile. So now what we saw is tuple. Tuple is basically is represented by curly braces. And tuple is what? Tuple is mute. Tuple is what? Tuple is student. We already said that tuple is what? Tuple is immutable, right? Here I made mistake, sorry. List is mutable data type. Like we can change the value. But tuple is immutable. I'm sorry, I just explain you what it is, but I made a little mistake and I'm sorry for that, students. But I hope when I told you same, that list is basically mutable. We can change the value, but tuple is immutable. We can't modify the value. We can't modify the value in the tuple. Okay, and list tuple is represented by curly braces. Now we are now the example that we saw in the tuple is basically example. We are initializing a tuple data by taking the variable tuple data, and what we are doing, we are initializing a tuple. Tuple is initialized or represented by curly braces. In the curly braces we are using n example is of students is of basically tuple, right? And we are here, we are printing the tuple data, means whatever we initialized in the tuple data, all our data gets printed by using the print function in Python. And here we go, we are running it. And now see what is the output. Output is the data in the tuple and examples of tuple, right? Always remember, students, always remember The thing is that list is an element of Python which is basically mutable. We can't change the value inside the list, whereas tuple is basically elements of Python which is immutable and we can't modify the value. We can't modify the value inside the tuple, but we can change the value in a list. I hope students you remember very well, and that is what we did here. Whereas here in that lecture I am going to summary up that there are the elements of Python which is used to make the code. That element of Python consists in a program of Python. And what are the elements of Python variable, string literal, list, tuple. These are the elements of Python. And here we saw the syntax. Here string literal, list, they're represented by square bracket, tuple is represented by curly braces, that is mutable, and tuple is immutable. I hope you understood very well. Thank you so much, student.